Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we tapping into the dangerous streets of Chicago. We're gonna be talking about the Black P Stones and the Latin Kings. Mainly looking at Bush Latin King, Martin Ybarra, aka King Slim, who committed a triple homicide back in 2009. Now King Slim grew up on 83rd in Buffalo, one of the most dangerous blocks, an area controlled by the Bush Latin Kings. Now the Bush Latin Kings are a subset of the almighty Latin King Nation. Originally, this area was known as the Bush Nation, but by 1983, Bush Nation became extinct and many members turned Latin Kings. And this would eventually lead to this area being called the Bush or the Bush Latin Kings, or better known as 360 Squad. And by the age of 16 in 2005, King Slim will be accused of killing a 19-year-old Dragontown gang member, Danny Ubieta. Now, Danny was shot on 87th and Exchange. Now, Danny will be transported to the hospital where he will be pronounced dead. King Slim would be arrested and charged for this murder. But in August of 2008, King Slim will be acquitted of all charges. But just 6 months later, a war would kick off between the Latin Kings and rival Stones that would end in a violent bloodshed. February 2009, Latin King member Giovanni Lopez, he would call King Slim, asking for his help to deal with some beef that he had with some Stones. King Slim agreed to help him out. So Giovanni Lopez would go pick up King Slim, and they would then drive to King Slim's home, where he would get on the phone and call his sister, Veronica, and tell Veronica to bring his AK-47 to the front door. Once they arrived to his house, Giovanni Lopez would get out the car and run up to the front door and grab the AK and bring it back to the car. At around 2 p.m., the Latin Kings would drive over to Bowen High School. Now, Bowen High School sits between GMB Murder Ave and the 89th Big Time Latin King Hood. Now, also around this same time, a Black P Stone member known as Dominique Atkins received a phone call from a fellow P Stone member named Carnell Pitts, asking Atkins to pick up his little brother named Kendrick Pitts from Bowen High School. So Dominique Atkins agreed to pick up Kendrick Pitts from school. At around 3 p.m., Atkins would arrive at Bowen High School and would wait outside for school to let out to pick up Kendrick Pitts. But as he sat outside, he saw a dark blue car pull up and 2 Latin Kings jumped out the car. Eventually, a fight broke out between the Latin Kings and a bunch of Black P Stone members. And one of the Latin Kings included King Slim. Dominique Atkins recognized King Slim because at one point in time, he dated his sister Veronica. Eventually, Atkins would jump in and start fighting with the Latin Kings. Shortly after, a school safety officer came outside and broke the fight up, and the P Stones and the Latin Kings went their separate ways. Dominique Atkins and Kendrick Pitts began to head to walk back home. As they walked down South Exchange towards 87th Street, the same dark blue color car that the Latin Kings drove would stop in the middle of the street. When Atkins saw this, he would immediately take off his jacket and run straight to the middle of the street, ready to fight. Giovanni Lopez from the Latin Kings would hop out the car and square up with Dominique Atkins. Now, neither man would throw a blow, but they would start arguing. And eventually, Lopez would get back in the car, and Dominique would turn his back and go to pick up his jacket. But as Dominique went to pick up his coat, he heard somebody yell out, "Look up." And as he turned around, King Slim stood there with his AK-47 and started shooting. Immediately, Dominique Atkins started running, but nearby stood 15-year-old Raheem Washington, aka Chico, from 085 No Limit. He stood nearby a Lincoln Navigator as King Slim fired in his direction. Chico attempted to run, but was hit multiple times in the leg, the back, and the head. Atkins and Kendrick Pitts both ran together towards 87th Street when suddenly the Latin Kings car was seen coming out a nearby alleyway and started to chase after them. King Slim would lean out the window and start shooting. Atkins ran into a nearby vacant lot as King Slim continued to fire. Atkins found a dumpster where he jumped inside, but Kendrick would be shot in the leg and head as he fell by a nearby sidewalk in front of a house. Kendrick Pitts would die at the scene from his injuries. After the shooting finally stopped, Atkins immediately realized that Kendrick was not beside him. So he got out of the dumpster and began walking through the vacant lot and saw 13-year-old Johnny Edwards laying on the ground with a bullet wound in his back as his brother sat next to him screaming for help. And as Atkins continued to walk, that's when he saw the body of Kendrick Pitts laying on the sidewalk with multiple gunshot wounds to his body. At this point in time, the Latin Kings had already fled the scene, but police and EMTs would arrive shortly later. Chico and Johnny Edwards will be immediately transported to a nearby hospital where both will be pronounced dead from the gunshot wounds. King Slim would arrive back home with the same AK that he just used in the murders. Now, his sister's boyfriend, Adolfo Hernandez, who is another Latin king, will be sitting down watching the news, and King Slim will sit down with him, and it will be a breaking news story of the shooting that just occurred.
3 teenagers are dead, and a gunman remains on the loose following a shooting on Chicago's South Side. The shooting happened Friday afternoon, just a short distance away from Immaculate Conception School.
The commotion, AK-47, knowing that it was a real loud.
Police say the 3 teens were ages 13, 14, and 17. One of them died at the scene. The other 2 died after being transported to the hospital.
Now, King Slim's father would take the AK and put it in a duffel bag and hide it in a plastic playhouse outside the apartment. Shortly after watching the news clip, both Hernandez and King Slim would leave the house. As the police began their investigation, Dominique Atkins and other eyewitnesses would describe the shooting, plus identify King Slim as the shooter. Police would later head to King Slim's home, but by the time they arrived, he had already left. But King Slim's father would show the officers where the gun was located. Forensics would not be able to put any fingerprints or DNA off the gun. It's believed that King Slim wore latex gloves. But 4 days later, on February 24th, police would arrest King Slim, and he will be charged with 3 counts of murder. Witnesses would also identify Giovanni Lopez as being a part of this triple murder. Lopez will be on the run for nearly 10 months before being arrested by Chicago PD on December 25th. And Giovanni Lopez would also be charged with 3 counts of murder. Now, during the trial, 6 witnesses would testify against King Slim. Black P. Stone member Dominique Atkins will be one of the witnesses. Another will be King Slim's sister, Veronica, along with her boyfriend and fellow Latin king, Adolfo Hernandez, and a few other eyewitnesses. Adolfo Hernandez would testify that while he and King Slim watched the news about the murders, King Slim began smiling as if he was proud of what he had done. And he would also admit to Hernandez that he was responsible for that shooting. Now, King Slim's defense would argue that Slim had a very troubled childhood, a childhood full of poverty, low IQ, that he and his sister suffered from years of abuse, and that his mother actually smoked crack while she was pregnant with him. But the judge would not buy what he was selling. The judge will go on to state during the trial that King Slim terrorized the streets of Chicago, and that he killed 2 high school teens and a middle schooler for sport, that he did not see King Slim having any redeemable qualities, that he did not deserve to see the light of day ever again. And by the end of the trial, King Slim will be found guilty of all 3 murders and sentenced to life in prison. His co-defendant, Giovanni Lopez, will be acquitted of all charges. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.